What's going on, guys? It's Tom, or Top 10 Wrestling, and welcome back to another video on the channel. Some of the most interesting moments in wrestling to look back on are those that were not planned and were quote-unquote unscripted. But the moment we're looking back on today was a not so great unscripted moment. We're going to be looking in detail at the Austin Aries and Christy Hemme incident from TNA in 2013. Before we do get into it though, be sure to subscribe with notifications on. I'm trying to hit 200k, so any help would be appreciated. I recently saw that Daphne subscribed to me, so Daphne, if you're watching this, big ups to you, you're forever one of my favourites. But let's just get into this video. Christy Hemme began her wrestling career in the 2004 WWE Diva Search, which she won. She was signed to the WWE, where she stayed until the end of 2005 when she was released from her WWE contract on her own terms. She never really did much in the WWE apart from winning the Diva Search, and her run there in the company wasn't really all too memorable. Christy Hemme would sign with TNA in 2006, becoming the manager for the Rock and Rave Infection, being involved in their feuds with the likes of LAX and the Voodoo Kin Mafia, wrestling a few matches here and there, mainly tag matches where she was teaming with the Rock and Rave Infection of Lance Hoyt and Jimmy Rave. In 2008, she would slowly start drifting away from the Rock and Rave Infection and start involving herself in singles competition and become a straight-up wrestler rather than a manager or a valet. During her time as a singles wrestler, she feuded with the likes of the Beautiful People, but she was mainly used as a jobber and lost most of the matches that she was in. On December 10th, 2009, Christy Hemme would debut in a new role as a backstage interviewer, and 6 days later announced her retirement from in-ring competition. Christy Hemme was really good in this role as a backstage interviewer. It really suited her, she was very natural, and it seemed she was almost made to do announcing work. Which she did, as on the April 28th, 2011 episode of Impact, Christy Hemme would officially debut as an in-ring announcer, which again, she was very good at. So yeah, that's about as much backstory we need for Christy Hemme going into the main story in this video. Let's talk about Austin Aries, a man who needs no introduction to any TNA fan, but also a man who is someone who was no short of controversy during his time in wrestling. There are many reports of him being troublesome backstage and having an awful backstage attitude, so much so that he was supposedly released from the WWE for having an awful backstage attitude just after he was done with a program with Neville competing for a title in 2017. He's also had his fair share of controversy in TNA. Just look at that moment with him and John Morrison from 2018. In fact, I made a video on that, which you can go and watch if you'd like. But despite his backstage attitude, there's no doubt he's one of the best TNA wrestlers of all time. He's a multi-time TNA World Champion, X Division Champion, Tag Champion, and even Grand Champion. And he was all this while still putting on awesome matches. He began his TNA career in 2005, staying until 2007, and he'd make his return to the company in 2011, where he would have his second run with the company. That would be the more well-known run, where he was just awesome. He won the X Division title in September of that year, and would have his famous record-breaking near year-long reign, which can be argued is one of the best title reigns in TNA history, and this reign would be where Option C was introduced, the rule that you can vacate the X Division title in exchange for a world title shot. Aries used Option C to end his record-breaking 301-day reign and challenged Bobby Roode at Destination X 2012 to win the world title. He would hold the world title for 98 days before losing it to Jeff Hardy at Bound for Glory 2012. He would spend the next few months feuding with Hardy to try and regain the title, with people like Aces and Eights, Bully Ray, and Bobby Roode getting involved in the feud. I just realised that rhymed, haha, so funny. On January 25th, 2013, while TNA was taping in Manchester in the UK, my hometown, Bobby Roode and Austin Aries began teaming together kind of out of nowhere and challenged Hernandez and Chavo Guerrero for the tag team titles, which they won, which was cool. Aries and Roode, despite feuding with each other the year previously, made a pretty good tag team. It was just a tag team of two top heels, and they were pretty darn good. They would hold the titles for a couple months before losing them on April 11th, but they would continue teaming here on out, and this is where the incident would take place. On the May 9th, 2013 episode of Impact, Christy Hemme was in the ring, announcing the entrances for Austin Aries and Bobby Roode, who were coming out to the ring for their match with Bad Influence, aka Christopher Daniels and Frankie Kazarian. Austin Aries and Bobby Roode entered first, but Christy Hemme botched the announcement. She accidentally announced that Kazarian and Daniels were the ones entering. Rather than ignoring it, Aries and Roode decided to play their heel characters and roll with it and try to make the best out of the situation and make it look like it was not a botch, putting on disgusted faces when they heard Kaz and Daniels being announced, and Aries in particular walked ahead of Roode into the ring to corner Christy Hemme. He made her re-announce them as Austin Aries and Bobby Roode. So far, it's all well and good. I mean, Aries is playing that heel character role, but then, while Aries was still cornering Christy, he proceeded to stand on the middle turnbuckle to taunt the crowd, effectively putting his crotch in Christy Hemme's face, who was visibly and audibly uncomfortable. The match went on as normal, and at first it seemed like an awkward moment, but a lot would happen the next day and the days following. Following the show, Christy Hemme took to Twitter replying to a fan asking if Aries had put her nuts in her face, saying, "Yes, unacceptable." And following this tweet, SE Scoops reached out to a source within TNA asking if Hemme was genuinely bothered by what happened, and they replied saying, quote, "Of course she was. How would you react? It's one thing if that was set up as a work earlier in the day, and even then our girls would have to reassure our agents over and over again that they would be okay with that spot before it got approved for television." The source also added that they believed Christy Hemme was technically sexually assaulted. Austin Aries would get lots of backlash from all ends of the wrestling world. He was fined by TNA, and he privately apologized to Christy Hemme, who was satisfied with the apology, and the two made amends, and afterwards Aries would also make a public apology. In a 2019 interview with Chris Van Vliet in December, Aries recalls the moment and everything that happened afterwards.
"Do it again. I think I said, do it again right." And she goes, ah. And she says the name, and I stand on the second rope, and I do my pose. And, you know, I try to give her as much clearance as possible. I didn't think about heights or where, I didn't think all this thing through. But I wasn't acknowledging her. It was like she was now vanished. And I assumed she would just vanish if she didn't want to be there. That's not what happened. She kind of was obviously kind of like, what the fuck? And she kind of like tapped my leg, and I hopped off, and I just stayed in character, and that was it. And
it was all very quick when you watch it back.
It's like 2 seconds, you know? And so I didn't think much of it. You know, I just figured like, okay, cool. Like we got some heat. I was just kind of a dick. Like I got to the back, and no one said anything. Went through the rest of the taping. No one made any mention of it, that there was any issue. I got home, and then the next day I got a call from the office saying I was going to be fined $5,000 for the incident with Christy. And I was like, whoa, like what incident with Christy? And like, well, the thing was like, whoa, I didn't even know that was an issue. Like, why didn't anybody say anything to me? You know, like I was there the whole fucking day, and no one came up and said what. I was like, yo, and it was Al Snow. It was, and I just said, hey, Al, let me call Christy and like talk to her. I certainly wasn't trying to offend her or whatever. And so I called her. We talked for 20 minutes, and she, you know, I explained kind of where I was at, and I apologized if, you know, she felt or whatever, you know, and I wish she would have came and said something to me. And she kind of told me where her mindset was. Initially, she wasn't, but as the day went on and people were kind of coming up to her, she started thinking more about it, and just, you know, and I get, and I can understand too, like, you know, being a woman in the business, like you can, maybe some things can trigger you, and maybe it's not initially, or maybe when people start coming up and go, are you okay? Like, do you feel this way? And you start thinking about it, you know, whatever. Like, I get it. She explained her part. I explained mine. I told her I didn't have any issue with her professionally, wasn't anything to do, and it was cool, and we ended the conversation in good terms and all good. So
in this interview, Aries also claims that Dixie had written a public apology for him to use. He claims that it was absolutely awful, and it said, quote, something like, I want to apologize for my bad behavior against Christy Hemme, which Aries in the interview openly mocked. Aries would continue appearing on TV afterwards. He was not suspended, and luckily for TNA, this wasn't too big of a PR shitstorm for them. Overall, my thoughts on the whole ordeal was that I get Aries was trying to play the heel, and I thought, you know, fair enough to him trying to play the heel, make the botch not look that bad, but at the same time, I think cornering Christy Hemme was a bit far, and of course, even if it wasn't intentional, putting his crotch in her face was uncomfortable for Christy. At the end of the day, no matter what your opinion of the whole thing is, if Christy Hemme felt uncomfortable with it, then she's entitled to that, and Aries was in the wrong. So to summarize, a very awkward botch leads to a very awkward moment where Christy Hemme feels uncomfortable, Aries is forced to apologize, lots of bad PR for TNA, but luckily it wasn't too damaging to them, and they were able to almost just continue as normal. But anyway guys, that's going to do it for this video. If you did enjoy, smack that like button. Before we do end the video, I'd like to give a shout out to my graphic designer who's been designing my thumbnails as of late. You might see them. Also my new channel art he designed. His Twitter is @thataaronguy. I'll leave a link to him in the description. Go give him a thank you. He's been doing bits to the channel as of late, and I can't thank him enough. But that's it for the video. Subscribe with notifications on. Like the video if you did enjoy. Leave a comment telling me what you think of this whole incident. Follow me on Twitter @Top10Wrestling. My Instagram is @I'mTomBell. I've got a new wrestling podcast launching soon, so more news will be from that very soon. More news for that very soon. Check me out on Patreon, patreon.com/Top10Wrestling. See you all soon. Goodbye, and keep on rolling.